So welcome everybody to this Belfast Summer School guest lecture. Our speaker today is Lauren Heilman, and Lauren is joining us from Salem, Alabama. Yep. She is a graduate student in the Classical Studies program at Villanova University, and she has a bachelor's degree in French and, very impressive, another bachelor's degree in English, both of these from Bob Jones University. And as if that wasn't enough, she was awarded Outstanding Graduate for both modern languages and English language and literature. Lauren also studies ballet and various forms of international and traditional dance. And her research interests include the transformation of classical drama by 17th century French playwrights and the role of music in Greek and Roman theatre. Lauren has been a student of mine. Yeah, she's been my student since January 2021. It feels like longer. It's just 18 months. And she was a beginner in Greek at that time, and she started Latin a few months later. And I have so much respect for Lauren because she's now studying Greek and Latin texts in the original language at Villanova. So she's made amazing progress. She's an inspiration. And today she's going to speak to us about dance in the Homeric world. Lauren, over to you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you for inviting me here. And it's been a joy to have you as my professor, as well as Pavlina, who's here today. And each of you, it's been a wonderful experience with HM Classics Academy. I'm very thrilled to have had your classes for the past 18 months or more. It's been wonderful. So I will just share my screen here and let's see. All right. Can everyone see my screen all right? All right, good. All right, so obviously the title is Dance in the Homeric World, so we'll be covering the interpretation of dance in both the Iliad and the Odyssey. But first, we'll just talk briefly about some of the origins of Greek dance, particularly as it pertains to myth. So from its earliest beginnings, dance was associated with religion, myth, and ritual. Historically, Greek dance is believed to have originated in Crete, and one early myth connects dance origin to the birth of Zeus on that isle. To prevent Kronos from devouring her son, Rhea hid in Crete and bore Zeus there. She substituted a stone for Zeus to Kronos and hid infant Zeus with the Curetes. From Rhea, the Curetes learned a noisy, warlike dance, which they performed to drown out the cries of the infant deity by bashing their swords on their shields. And some traditions relate that these Curetes became priests of Zeus and maintained this dance as part of their rituals. And it is true that many of the mysteries contained a performance or reenactment of mythological subjects, of which dance was a large part. Yet to the ancient Greek mind, dance embodied more than choreographed movements to music. Dance was part of the origin of all things, part of the cosmos, the order of the gods, the movement of the gods and man, in fact, of movement itself. And Zeus, a prime mover, or perhaps I should say a principal mover, understood this well. Zeus, who in his infancy was preserved through dance, in his maturity concocted a much larger dance, a dance to end an era or an age, the age that Hesiod calls the Age of Heroes. For as many dances in antiquity were based upon or were used as a preparation for war, within the expanded Greek understanding of dance, war itself could be counted as such, as the Iliad demonstrates. Therefore, the Iliad may be seen as not only a fulfillment of Zeus's plans, but as a fulfillment of Zeus's life. Whereas as an infant, he was preserved through warlike dance, so in adulthood, he preserved peace among the gods through a far deadlier warlike dance. And whether it be in funerals or in sacrifices, dance plays a very prominent role in the Iliad. While it appears in subtle forms within religious contexts, the characters of the Iliad themselves reference dance explicitly as a metaphor for war and for life. And this most notably occurs when Hector references this fact in Book 7, when he says, "I know in close combat how to step to deadly Ares' dance." Now, Lawler states that to the Greek, the play of blow on blow in combat was a real dance, the grimmest and most terrible of all dances, in which he approached the cosmic dance of the gods. And many scholars have viewed the Iliad as a warrior's poem, in which case it may be seen equally as a dancer's poem, as it zooms in and out of the larger framework of the Trojan War, sometimes focusing on a few dancers and sometimes encompassing the entire corps. Now, Lawler suggested that dance as part of religious ritual can be seen as early in the Iliad as Book 1. So the earliest hint of dance in the Iliad comes from the first book. After Odysseus and his companions have returned Chryseis to her father, there are prayers and sacrifices to Apollo so that the plague which has been decimating the Achaeans may cease. The young men eat and drink, and all day long they propitiate the god with mulpe, singing the beautiful paean Melpontes, the far darter. The words mulpe and melpo here, as often seen in Greek literature, seem to denote both a song and a dance, as does the word paean. Apparently of Cretan origin, the paean was a solemn processional dance performed by dancers chanting a hymn to the accompaniment of flute and lyre. It could be a dance of war or of victory, or as here, a plea to a divinity of healing in time of sickness or epidemic. The same dance appears later in the Iliad. After Achilles' great victory over Hector and Hector's death, Achilles invites the young Achaeans to follow him back to the ships, singing the paean and marching in triumphal procession. The connotation of the paean in the epic poems is always one of solemnity, restraint, dignity, deep reverence, never of riotous joy. Now, while a surface reading in translation may not immediately suggest the presence of dance in this passage, Lawler's study offers insight into the fuller picture of religious ritual and the inclusion of dance within it. However, it must be remembered that dance in the Greek mind encompasses many forms of movement, including processionals similar to modern parades. Thus, dance can almost be equated to kinesis itself. And this broader definition of dance as movement allows for an examination of dance in Achilles' funeral rituals for Patroclus. When they had piled up vast quantities of wood everywhere, they sat down and waited all together. At once Achilles ordered the Myrmidons, lovers of warfare, to put on their bronze armor, and every man to yoke the horses to his chariot. And they arose and clothed themselves in armor and mounted their chariots, fighting men and charioteers alike, men in chariots in front, and a cloud of foot soldiers following, numberless. And in their midst his companions carried Patroclus, covering all his body with their hair that they had cut off and heaped on him. Behind them, glorious Achilles held Patroclus' head, grieving, for he was sending his blameless companion to Hades. Now, Achilles' chariot processional forms part of the parade-like dance of mourning for Patroclus, and Lawler notes this passage among others, saying that in antiquity, there was a tradition that Achilles was even the inventor of the armed dance performed around a corpse, a funeral pyre, or a burial mound. Now, this is not specifically stated in the Iliad, and as a matter of fact, armed funeral dances probably go even further back to Minoan Crete. However, from various passages in the epic, we may infer that the Homeric dance did include dances at funerals. In Iliad 23, we find men in armor ceremonially driving horses and chariots 3 times around the bier of Patroclus, a dance in the broad Greek sense of the word. Now, there we are. In a poem of warriors' movements, we have just seen some passages where dance was hinted out for funerals, but the greatest passage, or I should say that there is no passage that so encapsulates the spirit of movement as the description of the shield of Achilles. And on the god-crafted shield, images appear to be in constant motion. We have men grappling like living mortals, bronze armor flashing in the sun, and young men whirling in the dance. Now, Hephaestus' supernatural shieldcraft leaves the impression of motion, if not motion itself, on Achilles' shield. No stationary image of warrior's armor can appear to flash, nor can so vivid a description of almost living, zoe, mortals be depicted without supernatural aid. The Iliad depicts Hephaestus as the animator of inanimate designs. He creates living things out of precious metals, such as his golden servants. Women servants moved nimbly to support their lord. These were made of gold and resembled living young women. They have in them wits and understanding, and also voice and strength, for they have learnt their skills from the immortal gods. Hephaestus, the god of the forge, who employs robotic servants of his own creation, does not limit his animation skills to his helpers. The artist who designs dwelling for the gods and who goes to such lengths to depict the entire cosmos on Achilles' shield animates the images on the shield as well. Hephaestus' shield gives sequence to events that the narrator appears to be telling in real time. From quarrels to wedding feasts to dances, the shield is alive with images. As Barbara Graziosi states, Homer's description, however, emphasizes movement, sound, and the passing of time. It turns images into stories. It also adds a cosmic dimension. The shield as a whole is a powerful representation of the world and of human life in it. In short, movement is the unifying element of the shield and of the Iliad, the poem itself. And dance is one of the fullest human expressions of that movement. Now, on the shield of Achilles, there are 3 major dances that are depicted: a marriage dance, a vintage dance, and a festive Minoan dance. These 3 distinct dances offer suggestive insights into the role of Achilles in the Iliad and into the larger framework of the poem. 13 lines into the description of the shield, Hephaestus constructs a wedding. On it he fashioned 2 cities of mortal men, fine ones. In one there were weddings and feasts, and people were escorting brides from their chambers through the city with bright shining torches, and a loud marriage song rose up. Young men were whirling in the dance, and accompanying them flutes and lutes kept up their sound, and the women stood and marveled at it, each one by her own porch. The depiction of the marriage dance is telling, as it is the disruption of Menelaus's marriage that sparks the war, and early in the poem, Achilles' bride prize being stolen temporarily halts his battle lust. Now that Achilles will die before he can enjoy his own wedding, the poet is already aware, and perhaps Achilles vicariously lives out his full life through this shield. Achilles himself references his agency, suggesting that by shunning battle, he could return home and live out a peaceful life. This dichotomy of the 2 cities depicted on the shield seems to offer 2 prospective choices for Achilles' own life: the domestic marriage song at his father's house, a life where young men whirl in the dance, but where quarrels still exist, or the song of heroes at the second city, where the 2 armies of men were encamped. This second city mirrors Troy, where instead of the marriage dance, the dance of battle is depicted at length. Here, as stated earlier, the figures on the shield appear in animation, the dance of warriors on the shield. The gods join in and take sides, just as the gods do in the Iliad itself. Strife and confusion take their places on the field, along with the death specter, who is holding one freshly wounded man still alive, and another unwounded, and dragging another who was dead by his feet through the melee, a poignant reminder of Achilles' future treatment of Hector. The repetition of 2 throughout this passage, 2 cities, 2 men, 2 armies, 2 councils, 2 scouts, reinforces the twofold nature of Achilles' choice of an honorable death in battle over long life and marriage. In Book 16, Achilles himself wishes that he and Patroclus alone, we 2, could conquer Troy by themselves. And while the battlefield is not specifically labeled as a dance in this passage, its placement in opposition to the marriage dance allows for that parallel. Therefore, Achilles in essence chooses between 2 dances, relinquishing the marriage dance for the dance of battle and his eventual dance of death. In Book 19, Achilles heroically decks himself in god-fashioned armor before mounting his chariot to rejoin the battle. The slow motion relaying of details not only heightens anticipation, but emphasizes the gravity and ritual significance of Achilles' battle preparation. He lifted the strong helmet and set it on his head, and the horsehair-crested helmet shone out like a star, and the golden plumes that Hephaestus had fastened thickly about the crest were set waving. Then glorious Achilles tested himself in the armor to see if it fitted him and if his bright limbs moved freely. It became like wings to him, and it lifted up the shepherd of the people. Achilles' preparations may be compared to a bride or bridegroom's dressing for the wedding ceremony. Achilles is well aware that he signs his death warrant by entering the fray, and according to Naj, in the hero's search for Kleos, the heroically scripted death can be a substitute for the consummation of marriage. In this way, both images on the shield of Achilles, the imagery of the marriage dances and the dances of war, are combined in Achilles' choice to enter the battle. The elaborate preparations enhance the ritualistic significance of his decision, and dancing figures largely in both spheres. As discussed above, the definition of dance spans more than choreographed steps to music. Immediately after donning his armor, Achilles steps into his chariot and speaks with his horse, who prophesies his death. In ancient times, the chariot dance often appears as part of both funerary and even bridal rituals. We have seen already how chariots circling the funeral pyre can be viewed as a ritual funeral dance for Patroclus. Now, Platt traces the similarity of ancient Indian and Hellenic cultures in chariot racing as part of the marriage ritual. He cites Pindar's Olympian Ode 1 as partial verification of the role of chariots in long-standing Indo-European tradition of including chariots in bridal rituals. Platt views chariot rituals as independently generated variants on an inherited model of bridal competition myth that has been melded to a local chariot race tradition. And likewise, Claude Calam recognizes the marital association with horse imagery in Euripides' Hippolytus, which he summarizes as follows. Since Hippolytus is an adolescent who is submitted to Artemis and is sophron, prudent, he has no intention of allowing himself to be dominated by the forces of love imposed by Aphrodite, whether it is time or no. Judged by the system of values associated with this goddess, Hippolytus, like Iole, who refused the advances of Heracles, is a colt without a yoke insofar as he is assimilated to a young girl, Polon Atsuga. His refusal leads to his death, and it is his harness, the incarnation of Artemisian breaking in, that is the cause. the harness of the Anician mares, Tsutsugian Polon Enetan, symbol of Hippolytus's skill with horses, and consequently his accomplishment in adolescence, disappears by the will of the Graces who put to the yoke, Tsutsugian Karites, symbol of the sexual union promoted by Aphrodite and refused by the hero. After having submitted to Artemis of his own free will, Hippolytus is forced to submit to Aphrodite, but his resistance to the second taming brings his demise. Now, Hippolytus, whose very name suggests his eventual destruction by horses, refuses marriage, but as Calam states, dies in marital equine imagery. Achilles, on the other hand, in preparation for his own marriage or death, mounts his chariot and speaks to his immortal horses, one of whom prophesies his death. Thus, the final scene of Book 19 of the Iliad is layered in marriage imagery, demonstrating that Hephaestus' depiction of marriage dances is more apt than it appears at first glance. Now, immediately after this, Hephaestus creates, after these scenes of death that he has created, he contrasts it with scenes of pastoral farmland and harvest, again portraying the dichotomy of war and peace. On it, he set a vineyard, beautifully made of gold, heavily laden with grapes. The grape clusters along it were black, and the vines throughout were propped on silver poles. Round it, he made a ditch in blue enamel, and outside this, he worked a fence of tin. There was a single track to the vineyard by which pickers would go to gather in the vintage. Unmarried girls and youths with lightness in their hearts were carrying away the honey-sweet fruit in woven baskets, and in their midst a boy played beguilingly on a clear-voiced lyre and sang the Linus song to its accompaniment in a beautiful, light voice. And they kept time with him, singing and shouting, and followed him on dancing feet. Now, this vintage scene carries more than mere emotional relief from the graphic depiction of war. The harvest of fruits of war is continuously presented throughout the poem. Harvesting grapes in their prime may fittingly be compared to the harvest of men, as Trojans and Achaeans alike lose their lives, whether youths or aged. Whereas in the marriage dance, Hephaestus portrays only young men dancing. Here, unmarried girls and youths join in the dance, following the Linus singer Pied Piper fashion. The youths with lightness in their hearts are blissfully unaware of the horrors of war depicted in earlier lines, a fitting symbol for all youths, male and female, Trojan and Achaean, whose innocent lives are disrupted by the war. And there is a quality of innocence in this dance which recalls to mind the words of Menelaus in Book 13. It says, "There is satiety in all things, in sleep and love-making, in the loveliness of singing and the innocent dance." The epithet amoumonos, translated by Lattimore as innocent, can also be translated as blameless, an epithet used throughout the Iliad for warriors. Polydamas is often referred to as blameless, and Hector's ignoring Polydamas' good counsel results in disaster. Polydamas, while blameless himself, must suffer the consequences of his superior's decision, just as so many blameless ones in the war suffer for the decisions of a few. The treading of grapes in the winepress may likewise be viewed as a harmless or blameless dance, yet throughout the centuries, the treading of the winepress has likewise been equated to judgment. The final dance image on the shield of Achilles portrays a dancing place reminiscent of Ariadne's and focuses on the future promise of marriage, a promise that Achilles, like Ariadne, will never truly enjoy. The third dance reminds us of Achilles' unfulfilled marriage potential. On it, the far-famed bow-legged god worked a dancing place, just like the one which Daedalus had fashioned in time past in spacious Knossos for Ariadne of the beautiful hair. On it, young men and girls who would earn marriage gifts of oxen were dancing, holding each other at the wrist. The girls wore light linen clothes, while the boys were dressed in well-woven tunics, gleaming faintly with a sheen of oil. The girls had beautiful garlands, and the boys had daggers of gold, hanging from silver sword belts. At one time, they would dance in a circle on skillful feet very lightly, as when a potter sits at the wheel that fits his hands and tries to see if it will run. And at another, they would run up in lines towards each other. A great crowd was standing around the lovely dance, watching with delight, and among them a divine singer sang and played the lyre, and in their company whirled two tumblers, taking the lead in song and dance. And this reference to a dancing place is interesting in that it highlights a place before highlighting the act, festive dancing, that occurs at that place. In a similar way, one cannot reference the place of Troy without thinking immediately of the acts of the Trojan War. However, the dance floor is specifically related to the mythic tale of Ariadne, and Barbara Graziosi notes that this is the only reference to a dance floor built by Daedalus, the mythical craftsman, as he was more generally credited with building the labyrinth for Ariadne's father, Minos, who of course kept the Minotaur in it. Perhaps the poet intends a link to the labyrinth in this image of the dancing place, perhaps not. However, the audience might be likely to make connections between the two, as the image of Ariadne abandoned on the Isle of Naxos may have been as prevalent in the ancients' mind as it has been throughout art history. But mentioning Ariadne without stating her eventual fate, the poet allows for a subtlety of suggestion, which returns the narrative to the subject of disrupted marriage that began the poem. The first of the three dances centered on marriages and contained young men whirling in the dance. Here, the third dance returns to the prospect of marriage as it depicts young men and girls who would earn marriage gifts. The emphasis lies on potential and creates a future thrust. Achilles, however, knows he has only a short future ahead of him, and one is left to lament his unfulfilled potential. However, by re-entering the battle, he re-enters the society he had shunned in order to fulfill his role as righteous avenger. By comparing these three dances in conjunction, one may notice that the first dance contains only men, whereas the last two contain mixed groups. While the significance of this fact may easily be overstressed, one could interpret a loose parallel to Achilles at the beginning of the poem, choosing to remain alone, in the company of men primarily, as he sings the glorious deeds of men, before rejoining his place in the community, a mixed group, by the end of the poem. Rather than mourning Patroclus alone, the women chime in, including Briseis, who starts a ritual lament. Achilles accepts Agamemnon's gifts and re-enters the fray. However, all is not restored. The reader, or rather listener, knows that Helen will eventually be restored to Menelaus, and that Briseis is returned to Achilles. However, the restoration of marriage that Helen and Menelaus experience will not occur for Achilles, who dies unwed. The cyclical nature of these three dances, marriage, harvest, marriage, reflects the cyclical nature of life and the rhapsode's close attention to ritual significance in ancient psyche. As we have seen, dance functions in marriage and funerary rituals and could even be viewed on the battlefield. Motion, therefore, is an integral part of ritual, and life can only be viewed in terms of motion. The cyclical nature of these three dances depicted on the shield of Achilles, marriage, harvest, or vintage, and marriage, as we see in the Minoan dance, can be seen even in the dancers' circular steps. They would dance in a circle on skillful feet. Achilles himself orchestrates the circular dances of the chariot procession, and even his direction of battle relates to his role as a leader or even a dance leader of the people. As Lawler interprets, the word kamos from orkos, a row or a file used in later Greek to denote the chief dancer of a group, is often used of heroes. Achilles is orkamos andron, dance leader of men, as is Asios in the opposing ranks. Also, Achilles, Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Patroclus are addressed severally as orkame laon, dance leader of the people. Now, Achilles may not be physically present on his shield, but in a kaleidoscope picture of twin cities, ritual dances, the movements of war, of peace, and the motion of the spheres, fragments of Achilles, the chief dancer, come vividly to life. And his role as Orkamos Andron may stem from his descent from Thetis, for Thetis herself, in her lament for her son's grief, takes on the role of a choral leader of her fellow nymphs. Achilles gave a terrible cry, and his revered mother heard him, and sitting in the depths of the salt sea near her father the ancient, in turn screamed in grief, and the goddesses gathered round. The shining white cave was filled with these nymphs, and they all together beat their breasts, and the keening was led by Thetis. So she spoke and left the cave, and the nymphs went with her, weeping, and around them the waves of the sea were split apart. When they reached rich-soiled Troy, they came ashore one by one on the beach around swift-footed Achilles. Thetis leads the keening exekech goyo, or threnody, as Lattimore translates it, denoting its musical context. Thetis is seen as the one beginning or leading the lament, which contains both song and rhythmic movement of swimming and breastbeating. And the fluid movements resemble the entry of the chorus on the stage as the nymphs rise from the water, and they appear one by one on the shore, encircling Achilles, the Orkamos Andron. Naj describes Thetis as performing her lament as she sings to her son Achilles as if he were already dead. She feels the sorrow he feels over the death of Patroclus, and that sorrow translates into the sorrow that she feels by foreseeing, goddess that she is, the death of Achilles himself. And one of the greatest honors that Thetis gives her son, who is denied immortality, is that of participating role in his own preparatory funeral dirge, or rather, a choral dance of death. And in the final book of the Odyssey, Agamemnon assures Achilles in the underworld that he has received his kleos, and that his noble reputation will last among all men forever. Now, as we transition from the realm of the Iliad to the realm of the Odyssey, we find dance again taking a prominent role in the Homeric epic, however disguised to the modern eye. On the one hand, like Achilles, we have a chief dancer, Odysseus, the man of many ways, many minds, many ideas, and certainly, in this peripatetic work, many movements. The overarching motions of Odysseus may themselves take on a labyrinthine quality which may be reflected in the labyrinth dances of religious mysteries. One such cloaked reference to the mysteries is found in Book 19, where Athena leads Odysseus and Telemachus through dark halls by mysterious torchlight. This scene has caused speculation of its association with the Eleusinian mysteries, which contained a similar journey from darkness to light. In addition to the many subtle religious and ritual references contained within the epic, the Odyssey boasts a complex plot, ever swaying in and out of sequential time like the waves of the sea it depicts. Thus, movement, ritual, mystery, dance, both sacred and symbolic, in fact, multiple forms of kinesis, lie at the heart of the Odyssey. And as Purvis states, in the Odyssey, it is the movement of this body, that is Odysseus's, through space that animates and energizes the thread of the poem as a whole. Whereas in the Iliad, we study the movements of warriors, heroes, mortals, deities, and even the movements on an inanimate object, the shield. In the Odyssey, we are chiefly concerned with the movements of one man and of those who come within his orbit. Known chiefly for his exceptional labyrinthine mental activity, Odysseus dances in and out of difficult situations with exceptional skill. In the strict sense of the word, Odysseus never physically dances. However, he does take on the role of spectator to some of the most fabulous dance passages in the Homeric oeuvre. On washing up at Phastia, Odysseus interrupts what has been described as a choral performance by Nausicaa and her maidens. Nausicaa's presence at the river is due to her expressed desire to wash her brother's clothes, for they are always wanting newly washed clothes to wear at the dance. And when the maids and Nausicaa had enjoyed their meal, they threw away their headscarves and began to play at ball, and among them white-armed Nausicaa led their games. In this passage, what Verity translates as games, Lattimore translates as in the dance, which reflects the rhythmic nuance of the Greek molpes, as we saw it in Iliad 1. In the Iliad, a wrongfully stolen woman, the daughter of Chryses, is being returned, and religious rituals, including reverent song and dance, are being performed to abate the plague. Here, while the tone is joyful rather than melancholy, the use of molpes, demonstrating that this passage is likewise coded in religious ceremonial imagery. And as we have seen, ancient dance has nearly always been connected to the divine. The poet further enhances this understanding by comparing Nausicaa to Artemis. Like Artemis, shooter of arrows, when she moves down the mountain, striding along lofty Taygetus or Emanthus, taking delight in the chase of boars or swift deer and country-haunting nymphs, daughters of Aegis-wearing Zeus sport with her as she goes. And Leto's heart is gladdened because Artemis holds her head and brow higher than them all, and she is easily marked out, though all are beautiful. Just so the unwed girl stood out among her maidservants. Nausicaa, by her role in the dance, is signaled as the chief dancer, having her head and brow higher than them. And even as a chief virgin among virgins, relating her to goddess-like status. She is Parthenos, virgin, which may hint at a connection to the ever-present Athena, who has orchestrated her presence here. And she is compared to Artemis, a connection the poet assigns to the heroes Helen and Penelope as well. Therefore, in description, Nausicaa is flanked by the two chief virgin goddesses and also assigned a role as memorable as that of Helen or Penelope. As we have previously seen, Achilles' title of Orkamos Andron, dance leader of men, or leader of men in the dance. Nausicaa too is couched in similar terms as the Erketo Molpes, designating her as the one leading the others in the dance. But when Odysseus arrives, the maidens flee, with the exception of Nausicaa, who stood firm, for Athena had put boldness into her heart and taken the fear from her limbs. The poet highlights Athena's presence, yet Odysseus's speech will reinforce the comparison to Artemis. He says, "Lady, I come to your knees. Are you goddess or mortal? If you are one of the gods who live in the broad high sky, that it is most nearly to Artemis, daughter of great Zeus, that I compare you in beauty and in stature and in form. But if you belong to the race of mortals who live on earth, 3 times blessed are your father and your revered mother, and 3 times blessed your brothers. How their hearts must grow warm with pleasure because of you, every time they see you, such a lovely slip of a girl, going to join the dance." Odysseus, perhaps divinely inspired, strikes the 2 important points of the poet's depiction of Nausicaa, her virgin goddess-like state and her participation in the dance. The phrase going to the dance, koron aiskes nusan, is interpreted by Olson as entering the chorus, and according to her, the poet highlights Nausicaa's choral persona even before Odysseus makes the comparison himself. And while Odysseus only imagines the experience of watching Nausicaa take her place in the chorus, the audience enjoys a vivid description of maidenly song and dance immediately prior to Odysseus's arrival. Nausicaa's relationship to Chorea is thus confirmed. Between the use of koron and molpes, the Nausicaa episode frames Odysseus's entry into Scheria in religious dance terminology. And Olson sees the Phasian dances as demonstrating Scheria's proximity to the divine. Odysseus continues this connection of the Phasians to divinity and of Nausicaa to Leto's children when he compares her to a Delian palm. But that man's heart must be blessed beyond all others who prevails with wedding gifts and takes you home as his bride. Never yet have I set eyes on anyone who resembles you, neither man nor woman. I am seized by all as I gaze. And Delos once, next to the altar of Apollo, I did see the like, the youthful shoot of a palm tree reaching upwards. The youthful shoot reaching upwards will mirror the dances that Nausicaa's brothers perform in Book 8. But the use of the word shoot, ernos, is in itself suggestive, where Thetis uses the same word erne in her lament for Achilles. He shot up like a tall sapling, and I nursed him like a young tree in a hill orchard. As Naj relates, Achilles is the ideal bridegroom cut off before ever receiving a wedding. Likewise, Nausicaa is presented as the ideal bride, yet she is never depicted as a wife. She is cut off in the realm of literature in her prime, much like Achilles, who, however, achieves godlike status through song. And Nausicaa's final moment in the Odyssey again depicts her godlike status. Now Nausicaa, whose beauty came from the gods, was standing by a pillar supporting the strongly built roof, filling her eyes with wonder at the sight of Odysseus. Speaking with winged words, she addressed him, "Farewell, guest, and when you are in your own land, think of me sometimes, for to me first you owe the debt of your life." To which Odysseus replies that he will pray to her every day of his life as to a goddess. And Nausicaa is seen no more. Nausicaa's brothers, on the other hand, whom Nausicaa describes as always going to the dance, are likewise depicted as chief dancers. Alcinous diverts Odysseus after the athletic games with a dance spectacle, saying, "We have always been lovers of the feast, the lyre, and the dance. So come, you who are best of the Phasian dancers, show off your steps, so that when he returns home, our guest may tell his loved ones how far we excel all other men in seamanship and running, in dancing and in song." The multi-scene spectacle that follows involves choral dance, the song of Ares and Aphrodite sung by Demodocus, and finally a dance by Nausicaa's brothers, Helios and Leomedes, whom Alcinous commands to dance on their own, since no one was a match for them, to crown the spectacle and highlight his children's skill. Their dance, ironically, is a ball dance, which echoes Nausicaa's in Book 6. Though often separated, these three elements, the choral dance, Demodocus's song, and the dance of Helios and Leomedes, may be viewed as parts of a composite whole, with dancers moving in and out before, after, and even during the narrative song. The entire poem itself scorns linear narrative, and therefore the linear aspect of the three performances need not be forced. Furthermore, Demodocus is seen preparing his lyre and positioning himself in the middle ground as preparations for the dance take place. As Olson notes, Demodocus is located in the midst of the dancers before the dance begins, suggesting a fundamental integration of the three modes of performance: song, instrumental music, and dance. Around Demodocus, the dancers begin. Young men in youth's first bloom, skilled in the dance, took their places and stamped their feet in the divine measure, and Odysseus watched their flashing feet and marveled in his heart. The divine aspect of this dance is not neglected, for the divine measure, koron theon, re-emphasizes the godlike nature of dance. As Homer closes Demodocus's song, he reveals Helios and Leomedes' dance. In their hands they held a beautiful ball colored purple that skillful Polybus had made for them. One of them, bending over backwards, would throw it up towards the shadowing clouds, and then the other would spring up from the ground and catch it easily before his feet touched the earth. When they had tested their skill by throwing it straight up, they danced on the earth that nourishes many, passing the ball to each other many times. And the other young men, standing around the arena, beat times, and a great din arose. Then indeed glorious Odysseus addressed Alcinous, "Lord Alcinous, distinguished among all peoples, you boasted that your dancers were the best, and here's the proof that it is so. Amazement grips me as I watch." Helios and Leonidas are seen as being above the skill of the rest of the chorus, much as their sister Nausicaa is above the maidens in her dance. Still, their dance has been called chorea in miniature for its role within the larger structure of the dance spectacle. Though they take the center roles, their dances complement each other. They are unified with each other through the rhythmic tossing of the ball and unified with the other dancers who beat times in unison with their dance. But while the Phasian books provide the most obvious examples of choral dance, other passages more subtly reference dances which occurred either as part of mysteries or within ritual retellings of myths, and one prominent example comes from the Circe episode. They stood at the outer doors of the lovely-haired goddess and could hear Circe indoors, singing in her sweet voice and moving back and forth at her great immortal loom, weaving a kind of delicate, bright, and graceful stuff that goddesses make. The first of them to speak was Polites, captain of men, who of all my companions was nearest and dearest to me. My friends, there is someone indoors working at a great loom, singing sweetly, and the whole floor echoes her voice. It is either a goddess or a woman. Let us call out to her at once. So he spoke, and they raised their voices and called out. Straightway Circe opened the shining doors and came out and invited them in, and they all, in their folly, went with her. Now, the phrasing of this passage frames Circe as engaging in a swaying movement at her loom and singing. The call and response of the companions and Circe echo what might have been the call and response of a chorus. Nevertheless, this episode has been connected to masked animal dances in ancient Greek ritual. Circe's subsequent transformation of these men into pigs could easily be reflected in a masked dance. Some ritual animal dances are believed to have been later translated into choral dance in the drama. Cephisodoros wrote a comedy entitled Swine, in which Lawler envisions the chorus performing porcine gyrations. Lawler further notes that Circe is called a goddess, and Potnia, mistress, lady, the latter recalling the epithet Potnia Theron, mistress of animals, used of many divinities of animal life. She uses drugs to change men into beasts, and she keeps them in order with a magic wand, Vrabdos, and with sweet song. As myth was known to be reenacted through ritual and dance, this episode may be connected with the discoveries of pig masks. Yet it is Odysseus's mind, with the aid of Hermes, that is able to outdance Circe's and escape her ritual cycle. Now, thus far we have seen Odysseus, unlike Achilles and Nausicaa, as a spectator and not a leader of the dance. In the Phasian dances, we saw Demodocus playing and singing the central role, fittingly, as he is often called a substitute for Homer, with the chorus around him. And in Book 21, Odysseus himself takes on a similar role as the singer, not dancer, in the midst of his own epic. Like Demodocus and like Homer, Odysseus is remembered for his unique story-creating abilities. Though Odysseus does possess great physical strength, as is about to be displayed in the slaughter of the suitors, it is as a songster that he is remembered, and thus fittingly as a songster that he is depicted. And his chief moment, when Odysseus outshines all others in competition with the bow, he is compared to a bard. But Odysseus, man of many wiles, lifted up the great bow, examining it from every side, and then, just as a man skilled in lyre playing and song, without difficulty stretches a string around a new peg, tying the well-twisted gut of a sheep at both its ends, so without any effort did Odysseus string the great bow. Taking it up in his right hand, he tested the string, and it sang out sweetly, like the song of a swallow. To state the visual similarity between bow and lyre is unnecessary, as the poet brilliantly sets up his comparison through epic simile. And at this point, Odysseus has assumed the role of chief singer, not unlike his poetic creator. This is further emphasized when the poet, via Odysseus, states, "I did not miss the mark," which is true both of Odysseus's bow and of the poet's skill. However, the performance is still about to begin. Odysseus, like Alcinous, directs his guests' attention to entertainment. But now it is time for supper to be served to the Achaeans, while it is light. Afterwards we may find other entertainment, with song and the lyre, for these are a feast's accompaniment. The song and lyre are reminiscent of the feast and dance Alcinous proposes after Odysseus awes the Phasians with his discus throwing. Alcinous diverts potential conflict, yet highlights his own son's competitive skill in the dance, which Odysseus wisely compliments. Here, Odysseus pretends to divert conflict momentarily, but in reality he is about to demonstrate his own superiority in the armed dance against the suitors. So he spoke and signed with his eyebrows, and Telemachus, the dear son of godlike Odysseus, slung his sharp sword about him and grasped his spear firmly, and took his stand by his father, next to his seat, armed in flashing bronze. Odysseus has stepped away from his role as bard and into the melee as the chief dancer, just as Achilles enters the fray after the death of Patroclus. Deadly Ares dance is sponsored chiefly by Athena, yet Odysseus and his company must prove their merit in battle. They arm themselves with shields and spears, weapons which often appear in armed dances and which harken back to the weapons used to protect Zeus in that very first dance in Crete. This purge of the suitors, which caused great conflict for Odysseus and his family, mirrors the purge of the Trojan War for Zeus, who realized the conflict the Age of Heroes created among his family of gods. The idea of ritual purging is further reinforced by Odysseus's cleansing the hall with fire, a symbol of death, before creating the ruse of the false wedding to mask any notion of what has occurred. Now let the God-inspired singer take up his clear-voiced lyre and be our leader in the light-hearted dance, so that anyone outside who hears it, passing wayfarer or one of our neighbors, will think a wedding feast is taking place. We do not want report of the suitors' slaying to spread far and wide through the town until we go out to visit our farm on its thickly wooded estate. Once there, we can consider whatever useful scheme the Olympian puts into our minds. The God-inspired singer becomes the leader of the light-hearted dance, the perfect fusion of song and movement, combining the roles Odysseus himself has just played as a singer, depicted by the song of his bow, and dancer, his movements in the ensuing battle. This certainly is a novelty, as the blind Demodocus did not dance, though he stands in the center position, but cited Phemius, who previously sang for the suitors by compulsion, now leads the dance, fulfilling two roles at once. This duality complements Odysseus's duality of disguised beggar and king. And the transition from blindness to sight may also signal the progression of Odysseus's journey and return to life. Then the God-inspired singer bard took up his hollow lyre and roused in them a desire for sweet singing and the pleasures of the dance. All around them, the great hall resounded to the beating feet of men and fine-girdled women in the dance. And this is what someone outside hearing them would say: one of her many suitors must have married the queen. The sweet singing and pleasures of the dance, molpes de glucere scaramumanos orcet moio, echoes the same phrase used by Menelaus in Iliad 13, 636-37, describing the natural order or fullness of life outside of insatiable war. Toward the end of the Odyssey, we get a glimpse of that life. Lattimore translates the full sentence as, since there is satiety in all things, and sleep and lovemaking, and the loveliness of singing and the innocent dance, and all these things a man will strive sooner to win satisfaction than in war. But in this the Trojans cannot be glutted. Fittingly, this wedding song, which marks the close of the first battle with the suitors in the Odyssey, encircles the recognition scene between Penelope and Odysseus, including their reconciliation, for it begins immediately after Odysseus and Penelope meet and closes the next morning. It fulfills a return to the kind of life Menelaus longed for, where family is restored, there is rest, there is love, there is loveliness of singing and innocent dance. And the wedding dance of the Odyssey is more than a mere ruse. The fire to wedding image evokes the similarity of funeral and wedding practices in the ancient world, and the fire itself recalls images of apotheosis, such as Heracles burning in the fire before his ascent to Olympus. That Odysseus met Heracles, or rather the shade of Heracles, for he now enjoys feasting among the immortal gods, during his descent to the underworld is suggestive. Odysseus, however, rejects immortality. This moment, as he is about to be revealed to Penelope, marks the end of his heroic days and his descent into ordinary manhood. The bridegroom-bride image created by Achilles, another underworld encounter, and to an extent Nausicaa, is repeated here as Odysseus, who was thought to be dead, returns and fulfills his role as bridegroom. And if the connection with these heroes were not enough, the clatter of the false wedding dance for Odysseus's protection again recalls Zeus's early protection via the noisy, warlike dance. Thus Odysseus remains a remnant of the age of heroes, yet neither an immortal nor the son of one. He is a man, a hero for the age of man, yet he maintains a proper connection to the divine. And in the labyrinthine mixture of song and dance that is the Odyssey, he is a warrior, a thinker, a singer, and dancer, a bard for the ages, like his creator. Though sadly barred by time from ever viewing ancient performance or recitation of these two epics, we do know that the original songs, and presumably accompanying dances as well, of the rhapsodes, influenced the development of dance, drama, and performance for centuries to come. From the festival Panathenaic performances of Homer to the reinterpretations of Homer's myth in the tragedies of Euripides, Aeschylus, and Sophocles, to the reinvention and reliving of these religious myths via mysteries and festivals, the Iliad and Odyssey continued to be performed ritually, religiously, with song and with dance, inviting contemplation and renewal in its spectators, auditors, performers, singers, and dancers. Like Achilles, the Homeric epics have achieved undying kleos, and through our interaction with them, we receive a longing for the kind of nostos Menelaus craved, where there is satiety in all things, and the loveliness of singing and the innocent dance. Thank you.